If you were with us last time, you'll understand that a dog is running your brain and is in the control room. And if you weren't with us for the last episode, this is going to be thoroughly confusing. I'm going to continue off now that we're back on the Sacred with Joe Wehbe podcast with Joe Wehbe, your host. I'm going to recap and go on, from the blog post we were reading on Astro the Dog who runs your life. Let's do it. Oh, obviously, I forgot to say, today we're going to be talking about how we train Astro. So that's a bit of important context. You can't instantly train Astro. For conditioning, reinforcement, or modeling to work, you need successive and consistent training sessions. You can't give Astro a one-off instruction. In that way, Astro the dog is like any young toddler or infant who we are toilet training. You don't expect your dog to sit the first time you give him or her an instruction. Training Astro takes patience. You have to walk and feed your dog. Sometimes Astro wants to eat, wants to go for a walk, wants to chase a ball, or another female dog. And he decides he wants to do this of his own accord, irrespective of what we, his owner, want to do. Dogs can't live all their time inside. And I should add to that, they can't spend all their time working. They can't spend all their time doing unnatural things. You've got to walk your dog. Sometimes we can't tell what Astro wants. Sometimes, and this is the most important part, sometimes Astro gets very upset because of something he wants. Sometimes he gets very scared about something, and we don't know where that fear has come from. For example, my friend Nick's dog, called Jake, is scared of crowds, but we don't know why. Jake can't tell us, and neither can Astro. They just bark, and we can't understand them. So that's another excerpt from the blog piece, and there's more of that to go, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But let's unpack that interesting idea about how we train Astro. So in the last episode, we talked about classical conditioning. There's also concepts like reinforcement and modeling. There's all these are terms from psychology, which talk about how we kind of learn things. So repeat association, practice, these are a lot of the tools we actually learn and build more complicated behaviors because of Astro. Because we can't just do something once, as much as we want to. We can't just do something once and master it. Not if it's complicated, not if it's sophisticated. That's just how we're wired. I gave the example in the last episode of public speaking versus being uncomfortable with other more intimate conversations or picking up girls, right? As a younger guy, disclaimer. So these are all very interesting things to think about how we can actually improve. Now, one thing we know that will not help is avoiding practice, is expecting to get things mastered the first time. To not get gradually more comfortable with things over time. And that's a really interesting conversation to even unpack more tomorrow. But I also gave the example yesterday of Pavlov and classical conditioning. And that's just super important. Now, another bit there was not being able to understand the dog. Now, how often is that true? How often do you have a fear or a setback or a wall to doing something where you think, why do I have this? Why am I afraid of that? I don't want to be afraid of that anymore. I can logically see why there's nothing scary about speaking in public, but the thought of it just terrifies me by association. Now, with that example, there's probably a good evolutionary explanation for that, which is being of high status helps your mating and procreation odds, right? The more high status you are, in theory, the better partner you can pick, therefore better genetic odds. Now, public speaking is kind of a twin-edged sword because it's actually very high status, which is confusing to be up there in front of people, command status. But the threat of embarrassing yourself and losing face is interpreted by this confused little dog in the brain. So if you picture yourself now as a dog looking out at a crowd full of people, how's a dog meant to understand that situation? The dog doesn't have that kind of wiring. And this is why the Astro metaphor is so rich. So its default mechanism and response is fear. So gradually getting Astro used to speak in front of crowds, building it up. But it's possible. We know it's possible because people do it all the time. Now, this Astro metaphor can be applied in many, very, very broad amount of ways. Today we're talking about training him. Now, an important part of training him is recognizing when and where his voice is different from yours. Now, Joshua Hodge, who's one of the co-authors for the book we're doing together at the moment for Duhat Labs, working title, though it's not published, is 18 and Lost, So Are We. Hopefully that's the end title if you're listening in the future to check it out. But the Astro metaphor resonated with him. He put a bit in his chapter about, which is brilliant, this is not from me, from him, about how to listen to what Astro says. So he added a section in the chapter about the decision-making process that he now goes through, which is when he comes up with a decision, maybe wanting to start a project or something that scares him, that gives him fear, he writes down what I'm saying, what the neocortex of his brain is saying, the conscious part where our thoughts ping around. He's writing what that part wants to do, start a project, give a talk. Then he writes down in another line below it what Astro wants. Astro's telling him it's scary to start a project. It's scary to get up in front of a crowd. Then he's got those two lines. Thirdly, you start to think about why Astro wants what he wants. Astro doesn't want me to speak because he's scared I'll embarrass myself, lose face, and hurt my mating odds. But that's probably not actually going to hurt your mating odds at all. Embarrassment is actually completely constructed in this day and age. The social cost of it is actually very low, funnily enough. Pardon me. So so you can use that tool. So if you start thinking about how this is actionable for you, how you can train your Astro, you can do that very exercise every time you're afraid about something or wanting to cross a hurdle. But lowering the barrier, getting an easier line to cross first and starting to condition Astro and just repeating, that's super important and helpful as well. So I hope that this episode opens some serious doors for you. When I say doors, this time I'm really talking about in your mind, because now that you can start identifying that one voice you think you have in your brain is not just one voice, and that part of that voice is coming from barking instructions deeper within your brain, that 90% controlled by Astro, and that is not you. You are not that dog. You are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are sent up to the front of your mind, your neocortex, your conscious self, for you to consider. And instead of considering them, sometimes now you're going to be writing them down and being able to look at them from afar and understand where and when they do not serve you, what they're trying to do. You are not those thoughts. You are going to stop being led by the dog. People are not walked around on leashes by dogs. Dogs are walked around on leashes held by humans. You're going to pick up the leash. Remember, the best way to open 1,000 doors for you is to concentrate on opening doors for others. And you're not going to let Astro stand in the way of doing that. Thank you. One more part of the Astro series to go. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.